Lance Armstrong had this line, which is that I went through life just assuming everyone's going to say yes to me. Now, that doesn't mean assuming you're going to get every single sale. It's just my job to get a yes or a no. If this person is closable, I will close. I think that every single time, even if I'm hurting financially in that moment, I embody that at all times. It actually gets me better results because you are inherently compelling and appealing if you assume things are going to work out and kind of convey that neediness. I'm just telling salespeople, just embody it as best you can, regardless of your pipeline. You'll actually get better results anyway. Welcome, everyone, to the Close More Sales podcast. Today, I have with me a mentor, someone I'm sure everyone in my audience knows. The very first guest I interviewed on this show, most of this show has been sort of talking head, talking about sales stuff. And I want to get to more interview, conversational formats to discuss stuff in the future. So here with me is Steve Trang, host of the Disruptors podcast, real estate investor, co-owner of a bank, shiny object syndrome entrepreneur, father, husband, the second best sales trainer in the world, and most importantly of all, trumping all that, my friend. Before I even introduce Steve in terms of asking him to speak himself, why listen to the show? What's the point of it all anyway? The purpose of this show is to inspire sales professionals and entrepreneurs to push themselves to grow, achieve unimaginable success without burning out, and ultimately transform their lives. I'm Ian Ross. I am obsessed with all things sales. I work with teams across the world at this point to make more money by asking better questions. I believe that sales is the lowest barrier with the highest possible ceiling for entry towards financial freedom. And so it's anyone who can have a sales role, if you can have conversations where how well you speak determines how much money you can make. You're in a sales role. If you'd like to get better at what you do, that's what this podcast is for. So if you'd enjoy this show, drop us a like, subscribe on YouTube, do all that jazz that all the young kids say. Leave a review where you listen to podcasts. And also share this episode with others, to quote someone I know, so we can all grow together. Steve, welcome to the Close More Sales podcast.
Thank you. Do I get at least like a, is they call it cryon? Was it the very bottom, lower third? It's a second goat?
Yeah, the second greatest of all time.
Second goat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Everyone likes to celebrate second or third place, so it's an important thing.
Sure.
So
Much esteemed.
what I have to go over today, specifically something I thought would be of interest to my audience, which I basically wanted to discuss with you, advanced sales tactics. I wanted to go over some stuff that I'm sure you've heard me talk about or had other people ask you in detail, but in a way where we can openly discuss it, you can critique it, you can add your own color to it, you can say how you think about things differently. I think that would be useful to my audience.
Yeah, and then this is kind of the conversations that you and I actually have.
Yeah.
Once, twice, maybe 3 times a week. But like, hey, I'm thinking about this. Hey, I read this. Hey, I'm trying this. That no one else really gets privy to hear those conversations.
It's part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast with you is because I'm aware that people who maybe not as much obsessed with sales and the nuance of language as me, because I'm a special being in that sense, but people who are trying to get better, trying to improve, taking their sales skills and the language they use to get someone to want to take action seriously. I know the stuff we talk about is advanced and in depth, and it would probably be valuable for people to listen to. So that was the goal of going over the podcast here today. So for the audience, if you'd like to make sure you can say everything we say on a follow-up call, so you never have to say, I'm just following up or I'm just checking in ever again. We have a template we give to you completely for free. Text follow up. That's 2 words to 33777. So that's a key point for those of you listening. So what I want to get into, what we'll cover today, Steve, I just want to go through a list of ideas, tactics, thought process around sales conversations and get your take on it and just sort of discuss it back and forth. The first thing I wanted to talk about is something that's relatively new, not to necessarily how we think about sales, being aware that it's an emotional drive rather than a logical one, but a nuance in how precise we are in communicating that to the people we train. Meaning this idea of the language that your prospect gives you, I think is an indicator of how emotional they are.
Yeah.
In that it goes even just beyond like, yeah, I feel sad or I feel rushed. It's like, if they're using certain types of language, it dictates that they're still in the logical neocortex part of their brain, as opposed to other language, which dictates they've now switched to the limbic system, which is where emotions are processed and where decisions are made.
Right.
So one of my favorite things I wanted to push back on right away, because I've seen this with so many other sales trainers, is when a prospect says, I need to think about it, which is probably one of the most common objections in all of sales.
Yeah.
Especially probably a good salespeople, because they don't even want to get told no. So they get told, let me think about it.
Right.
So many people train on this idea of what do you have to think about? And what I have realized is that is a mistake, because you're still using the think about language, which is still activating the logical part of the brain, rather than what do you still feel unsure about? So I just wanted to sort of get your take before we even dive deeper into that on that concept.
So I heard you talk about this a little bit last week, right? You were saying like someone giving an objection where like this doesn't feel right, or this feels like, maybe the price doesn't make sense, is a lot closer that someone's agreeable but using the word think. And I thought that was a really interesting nuance, right? Because like we're closer to the finish line if we're at least hearing emotional words versus reasoning words. So yeah, I do think, because that's something I've said before. It's like, okay, well, what exactly do you need to think about?
Right.
And for me, I would use that, I guess, looking back, kind of like a crutch, because whatever they said, now we can still at least keep the conversation going and find something to pull on to get us emotional. But this right here is a shortcut. It just goes straight into like, well, what is it that you feel unsure about? Now we can bring them back into the part of the brain that is more emotional.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because I'm always trying to use the same type of language that the prospects are using to me back at them.
Exactly.
So it makes it, I'm not saying it's crazy to say, if a prospect says, let me think about it, you respond, what do you need to think about? Because you're using the same words back.
You are using the same words, but also most other salespeople are using the same words, which then raises sales resistance.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying the same thing everyone else is saying, right? Because we have a philosophy using frameworks. There are a lot of sales trainers, salespeople that believe in using, the book of magic words. And so if you say like, okay, well, what exactly do you need to think about? You run the risk of triggering them having a bad sales experience, buying a car, buying something else, where the salesperson said that. Now they're having these negative emotions. They might not even know why.
Yeah.
But it's coming up.
Very true. Yeah. So I actually don't think I've gone over this specifically for this audience yet. So I should probably even make clear exactly the point of what you brought up, which is that this idea that if a prospect says, I feel rushed, or I feel like that price is a little too high, it shows they're actually closer to the sale than, I think that sounds good. Those numbers make sense. Yeah, it all sounds pretty okay. Even if it sounds like
they sound more agreeable.
They sound more agreeable to what you're saying. They're revealing being farther from making the decision.
Yeah.
So they are closer to the yes. They are also closer to the no. There's a distinction. They are still closer to the no, but also so many salespeople don't actually want to. They know this concept in theory, but they don't execute on this concept, which is that a no is the second best answer. So many salespeople would rather, I need to think it over, than the no, even though the logical part of their brain, they can parrot that belief, but they have such happy ears when they hear, I need to think it over, they get excited.
Well, I mean, I think the human ego, like, as good as anyone is, we still have elements of like rejection still hurts. It's just how little or how much it hurts depending on how strong your ego is, right?
Sure.
Or you could be a person who's newer and you're two months into this. Like every no is extremely painful.
Right.
And so you'd rather I need to think about it, even though we all know that a no has a greater chance of turning into a yes, that I need to think about it turning into a yes. If you're newer, that it's so heavy that no that you get early in your career.
It's also just, it's true that the no is also probably closer to a yes because it's a decision. It's also just being efficient with your time on top of all that, like to make sure you're spending your time appropriately rather than getting stuck in the endless follow-up game, crossing your fingers that they'll change their mind later and you can never get a hold of them again.
But I think that goes back to experience.
True. Yeah.
Right. And not everyone I mean, if you're on your own doing this, like that's kind of where I was for a long time. Like I had a mentor, but he was doing his thing. I didn't realize that I was wasting so much time, right? But then as you get further along, whether you're networking, you're watching this podcast, you're in a coaching program, you start realizing, oh my God, I am losing so much time on this prospect. So
I try and reiterate that point as much as possible, which is that because I am highly aware of this now that I have 2 kids under 2 as well. It becomes more clear than ever. My time was not precious when I was 24. Right?
Yeah.
Now, how I spend my time really matters because I've got other ways I could spend it besides work. So every second wasted on something that didn't have a chance to return on investment for that time infuriates me.
Yeah.
Even to this point, I mean, we talk about the idea of people don't want to have a hit to their ego. I was actually quite upset just yesterday, and it bothered me all night. I had to go for a long walk. I walked for like 6 miles last night because it was the first day I'd had 2 sales appointments with people who I felt were qualified, like who objectively seemed qualified. And I didn't get either one across the line because statistically my close rate is over 50%. It drove me nuts that I couldn't get either of them across the line, even though both of them gave me very agreeable, like one of them has a follow-up time within a couple days. The other has a follow-up time longer than that. Like everyone's like, I need to get the money together. I want to do this. But I've done this enough now. To me, that is more annoying than no, I don't want this. I would rather no, I don't want this or some aspect of this qualification.
Cross it off.
I can just cross it off. Because to me, that's a failure, and I still have to spend more time, even though statistically I might still get it. I'd rather than no. I don't know.
Well, I think that might be as a salesperson because there's multiple different personality profiles. There's salespeople that are really good with relationships, and there's salespeople that are really good at hunting.
Yeah.
You might just be more geared towards the hunting, and now you're like irritated that you need to go back and like grab some more ammo or some more arrows or whatever.
I don't need more. Statistically, I should have gotten one of those guys. That's what upsets me.
But we're talking about like losing time. One of the things that a concept that I've been teaching recently, we had our last live event in December. So I put this slide together because I noticed in doing some call reviews with some other teams that we're training, they're having conversations with prospects that are making zero progress.
Right.
And I had to emphasize to them, even if you're having a conversation with a prospect where you're making zero progress, is lost time, right? If we're not increasing motivation with every single question, with every single assumptive statement, with every label, whatever, if we're not increasing the likelihood of a sale, that's also wasting time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's either 2 directions I think we're either going when I'm talking in a context of a sales conversation. I'm either increasing motivation and moving towards the sale, or I am trying to disqualify you so I can talk to someone who I can do that with. So I'm okay with the no. I really am. But it's the stagnant setup of like, we're not making progress at all is an incredible waste of time because I want to be efficient. We all have the same hours in a week. Like there's no more time in a week. I have less technically now than I did when I was single and a young man. So as a result, I have to be more efficient. So the idea of wasted time bothers me to a pretty triggering degree. Yeah. So this leads me into the next one, which is how to, if they are stuck in that thinking part of the brain, the neocortex, how can we shift them to the emotional? And we gave an example here, which is just simply you using that language, but depending on where you are in the sale, closer to the end, tension's higher because people know you're going to push for the close. Or sometimes at the start, when you haven't built enough rapport and demonstrated trust, it can be hard for some salespeople to immediately do that. What's your thought on that before I go into what I have here?
I mean, one of my hacks, was not a hack, but just asking how are you feeling about all this? Because we have our pain questions and this and that. How do you feel? But one of the things that I've noticed when I'm recruiting is someone I want. I'll just ask them, hey, kind of curious, like, how are you feeling about what we're talking about right now?
Yeah.
And just asking that question, they look inward and start analyzing how they're feeling about it. And immediately they start closing themselves.
Yeah. So you're doing a pattern interrupt to make them look inward in a way to actually express the feelings currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's point blank. It means really as direct as you can be.
Yeah.
But I have found it to be effective. And it's just like, again, like we're having a conversation. It's like, hey, I'm just curious. Right.
I like that very much. What I was coming up with was much the same way you've got the hold on, let me write that down way to get someone back on track. Mine is a little bit more, there's a little bit more gymnastics involved in getting someone across the line, which works for me, but I'm aware it can be harder to train and teach other people to do. So what I was focusing on was this idea of a question like that, but rather than open-ended, intentionally closed off to make it easier to answer. So, because I closed off questions because they're easier to lie to, which is why we don't want to be in pursuit of them, means they're also easier to answer.
Yeah.
So I would use something like, say the lines of like, I just want to make sure, is this something that you're even feeling would make sense for you based on everything we've talked about so far? And if they give me a yes, or I mean, if they give me a no, that's a pretty clear sign to start towards a disqualification, depending on where we are in the process. But if I get a yes, I then ask an open-ended question, which would be, how so? Or can you tell me more about that? Or depending on what their answer is, just a mirror. So I have this idea of like intentionally closing off with a yes-no question, using feel-oriented language around an emotion, and then asking for clarity in one of three ways, probably in order of what would be most impactful would just be to mirror first. Next, what I call a lock-on question. So when you say, it feels good, could you tell me more about that? Or third, just how so? Just how so is one of my favorite two words of all times.
So universal, so many applications.
Yeah. So because I got asked the question when I was saying that if they're using emotional language, it shows they're closer to the sale. I got asked a great question on the training I did, which was, so if I ask, how would you feel if 6 months from now this weight was lifted off your shoulders and where you wanted to be? And they answer, I feel good. Are they ready to move forward? And I said, no, it shows you're in rapport because they're using your language back. But just that quick, they're just responding with your language. It didn't come out of them that they chose emotional language. They just basically parroted your words, which showed your rapport. So then I would go, feel good? Or how so? Or when you say you feel good, could you tell me more about that? Something about that to get them to then verbalize, which is you kind of, in this case, you're kind of shortcutting it with just how are you feeling right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to sort of talk about that, but it's a really, for those listening, it is a really powerful concept to understand. I'm kind of almost calling it like the hidden sales matrix of like, we have a sales process we're moving someone through. The hidden matrix that if you can see it, but everyone else can't. Like Neo at the end of the matrix realizing he can see the code, which is that if they are using emotional language or vivid imagery around that language, chances are they are closer to making a decision than if they are saying something that seems agreeable but sounds detached or analytical.
Right.
So I really like this differentiation and concept because I have not actually heard this talked about.
I've never heard this anywhere else.
Else in sales.
Like I said, we have these conversations in the hallways.
Yeah.
It's weird, but we love it. We geek out on it.
It gets me excited every day. This is what I geek out on.
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing I wanted to go into, unless you had any further thoughts or anything to say about that.
I mean, I'm thinking I'll probably do this like maybe once a month or something like that. So, there was something else that I actually had an epiphany yesterday in a different coaching call. If you don't want me to just
go ahead.
And it kind of goes into elements of saving time. There was a person, they were talking to a guy, this is a call review yesterday. They were talking to a prospect who is selling the house because it's his mom's house, his mom passed. Right. And they're like, oh man, like, I'm so sorry to hear about that. Like, what's going on? Like, what happened? All this other stuff. And I commended them for being more human than me. Right. Like, hey, that's great. You're demonstrating empathy and sympathy about the situation. But in my opinion, and this is just an opinion, right? This is not like, this is the way it is. Just my belief is that if we're talking about pains we can't solve, then we're spending time on pain that's killing our appointment, right? So like, you can't bring his mom back to life.
Right.
We could talk about like how his mom passing has left him with a situation with the house, and he has to deal with this. He has to deal with the funeral. Has to deal with like the siblings, and it's like, let's talk about all that stuff, all right? And like, and we can spend 30 seconds like, man, I'm so sorry, you know, like it must be awful. I can't imagine it. Like, do all those things, but then like having a further conversation about how much you miss your mom was like, we can't fix that,
Right. Yeah.
So like, you're losing time on this call.
I completely agree. And I had never thought that spending time on that pain is hurting the sale. I just view it as stagnation,
Right.
which we talked about at the start is kind of losing the sale.
You're losing
Stagnation
time.
is the worst because you're losing
Yeah.
time. Yeah, it's because this gets brought up. I was talking to someone who's a coach, and an early script she paid a ton of money for to get someone to sign up for her like executive coaching. Had they said, hey, here's gather all the pain they're in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just gather as much pain as possible, just nonstop pain, because pain drives urgency and drives emotions. Right?
I mean, there's books that say find pain,
Right.
and then that's it.
But it didn't make it clear. Like, you don't need as much pain as possible. I actually think you only really need 3 pain points at most, as long as like selling to you if it's an asset or buying from you if you're selling something solves that pain.
Right.
You don't really need more than 3
Mhm.
because you can go deeper into the implications of any pain that they bring up. But as long as you actually solve it, that's the right pain to bring up. So it's like,
Yeah.
there's not enough focus on that idea, which is, to be clear, the very reason people pay a high price for things is the idea of understanding the value they get. Verbalizing the pain you solve is the easiest way
Mhm.
in a closing question or to push someone towards actually taking action to demonstrate the value, because it actually solves these things.
Right.
So it not only are you spending time on the wrong topic, which wastes time, if you're not talking about pain you can solve, talking about pain you solve is enhancing your value when you're actually trying to go for the close.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But once you have a product that you can bring someone back to life, then let's talk about how much you miss them.
True. Yeah, of course.
Once
Yes.
we have that, then
Well,
we're
once
gonna be
I'm
rich.
selling, that I don't think we'll need to do podcasts anymore. We can sell the elixir that brings people back from the dead. So yeah, speaking of elixir, the next thing I wanted to bring up for you is like, it's an imagery that you've pushed back on when I brought it up, as it was grimaced at a 2-day event, which is this idea of, in the flow of a conversation, every time you ask a question, because it can take effort for that person to answer, it's almost like casting a spell. It's almost like, I used a spell.
Mhm.
And this nuance of when you recap back what you just heard in a way of like your understanding of what's important to them, what they say, with like an actual summary, how they feel or felt, or also some aspect of their identity, which is the more nuanced thing. If you can say that back in the recap, it's almost like taking a mana potion to be able to cast more spells.
Yeah.
So this is another concept that is uniquely mine that I've talked about in the sales conversation. I hadn't heard brought up anywhere. What are your thoughts on, other than the way it's conveyed, seeming slightly nerdy, though sales is currently mostly a male profession, and most males of the generation in sales have probably played a video game at some point. I thought it was a smart analogy. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm filming this video for the man himself, Mr. Ian Ross. The guy crushes. The guy's the best person in sales I've ever seen. I've invested elsewhere and I haven't got the same results. I've gone from being a seller, making 5K a month, to being a hybrid role, making 11K a month, to now be 4 months down the line from 5K to on a closing opportunity, inbound, full calendar, with the best opportunity, the best offer in my space. OTE is around 20K a month from month 2. So I've gone from 5K to 20K. If that's not a return on your investment, I don't know what is, man. If you're a salesperson and you don't invest in sales training, you're gonna get left behind, because your job is to be better at sales. And sales training directly makes you more money.
My name is Lance McCann. I have recently switched sessions with Ian Ross. Those conversations with Ian has made me $50,000 in the past 2 deals that I've had. I was able to go back and renegotiate the original purchase price on one deal, and I saved $40,000, and I got another $10,000 off my other deals. Call Ian, give him a chance. You won't regret it.
If you like what you just heard and you'd like to have similar types of results, similar success, text CLOSE, CLOSE, to to 33777, and we'll see if you qualify to join Advanced Sales Mastery. We are taking people from good to great.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The idea is every time we ask a good question,
Yeah.
we're casting a spell.
Yeah.
And then recapping is refilling the mana bar.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. Particularly, you and I are going pretty hard into Milton Erickson,
Right.
right? And everything he's talking about as far as hypnotic and inducing trances, right? So I think like this is something that requires the question is not necessarily trance inducing, but we're literally casting something onto them that's forcing them, requiring them to take a moment to think about, and again, evaluate what's going on here. And it takes energy from them. But yeah, I think the giving us the risk we run of asking a question without recapping, without refilling the mana bar.
Yeah.
I think is a great point, because we need to asking a question for the sake of asking a question to gather more intel is fantastic. I don't think that's really taught enough either. But the recapping to refill the mana bar, in that we're building trust. I don't really hear anyone really talk about that as much either, even less so.
Right.
And I think that the part where we're recapping is why they trust us.
Right. Exactly.
Right? So me asking quality questions demonstrates to you I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing. I'm competent, right? Me recapping demonstrates to you is like, he gets me, and now I feel good that he is qualified to help me. So it's not just you're a professional, which is step one, but step two, he's the professional for me.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They go hand in hand. I demonstrate my expertise by how good my questions are, and I demonstrate I understand you as the prospect when I recap back what you said. You brought up the Milton Erickson. I actually would think most of the time I'm actually doing anything sort of trance-like is actually in the recap rather than the question, which is interesting. So it's like I'm almost. It sounds deeply manipulative if I just say it outright rather than demonstrating it. But if I am able to ask 2 or 3 great questions in a row and then recap my understanding back in the way that I'm able to now, it also starts to color the way the prospect is going to answer further questions. It goes hand in hand. It's like I'm basically putting them in a trance in what I say back, and then that helps guide, like incrementally, not suddenly as if I was waving something in front of them in hypnosis, but it starts to, our brain waves are probably operating on the same level. We're starting to connect deeper, and they feel like they trust me, and they're just in the moment. They can lose track of time.
Yeah.
They start to feel emotional. Like I tend not very often, and it does bother me when it happens because it's rare, have trouble having someone using emotional language at the end of the sale. And part of that is because I'm always throwing recapping back in that says, you probably feel like I've been thinking about this for a while. I know I need to take action on this, but you still feel like what you invested in before didn't get you the results you wanted. And the way I just did that, like they're really responding to, yeah, I didn't get results I wanted. That's right. They're giving me a that's right. But I've also just included emotional language in the recap. You feel like, so they're already thinking, I do feel that way, rather than I think like that. And then, even though I know I need to take action on that, I'm always burying little things like that just completely is filling up their subconscious, but their conscious brain isn't even
completely miss it.
Yeah, they completely miss it. They're just going, yeah, that's right, I invested and didn't get those results. And I always say, doing that one time doesn't win you the sale. Doing that consistently, incrementally over 45 minutes is very, very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the ability to have them feel like you get them is, we're talking about a high ticket sale, whether you're selling a high ticket product, a service, buying someone's house, any of these things, it's a large dollar transaction. And if they're not feeling like you get them, which is kind of like an identity sale, it's going to be a lot harder for them to pull that trigger, sign that contract to work with you.
Right. Yeah. And it always comes back to one of the most important concepts in neurolinguistics programming, which is mostly influenced a tremendous amount by Milton Erickson's techniques is this idea that people pay more for identity than utility. And so if you can include identity either in feeling congruent with who they feel they are right now or in pursuit of who they want to be, they're willing to pay way more for that identity than simply the utility of what they get. And we cover a lot of this in our training anyway, of talking about people aren't living in the cheapest house or driving the cheapest car, like wearing the cheapest clothes. There's always an aspect of identity in everything they do. In fact, this got brought up yesterday. I said to someone, because he was like, I don't feel like that's, I know that's true, but I don't feel like that's true for me. So part of me wants to fight that. I brought up like, part of the reason you fight that is because you have an identity of someone who prioritizes utility over identity. And you feel pride in being the person doing that. And he burst out laughing. He's like, you're absolutely right. My identity is that it's so important for me to not care about identity, that I care more about utility. He realized I was right in how calling it out. Like, in a way, he would almost pay more to stay congruent with that identity, even if it costs him in certain ways, because he has to have that identity.
It's like the iPhone user, right? Like we have to pay to be out of, what was it, a nonconformist.
Right.
We'll pay more to be a nonconformist, even though everyone's doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Cool. Okay. The next one I got is something that's very recently I talked about, I think just last week. And I think we touched on this in our conversation a little bit, maybe even just yesterday, which is this idea of this, you can present information in like an either or, and the order with which you do that matters.
Yeah.
So for the example, to have this make sense for the audience, we were talking about if we were trying to, and because most of Steve's training is currently focused on people who are acquiring properties at a discount. We're using that context a lot here. Mine as well, honestly. So that focus would be if someone's saying, I might go with my sister who's a real estate agent. I was coaching people who were saying they were using language like, oh, if at that price, we're not going to be a fit for you. But I can recommend a different agent, or, oh yeah, if you're going with your sister who's a real estate agent, like I can't do the price she could do, but yeah, you could go do that. And I thought it was really important to talk about basically saying the same thing. So I'm considering an agent, or I'm considering this higher price, and say you can get that price, or you should go with your sister first, and then your differentiation afterwards. By starting with the positive, you don't start with a denying or giving them a no, but you then present yourself as an alternative. And you had a interesting perspective on this.
Yeah, so because you brought this up, and I was like, I was kind of confused at first when you brought it up, right? Because like what I'll say is entirely dependent on what I'm given in the scenario, right? Like if they're saying like, well, I want as much money as possible, then my default is like, great, go get as much money as possible. Like don't let me get in the way, right? Like you got the time, the money, energy, you got a contractor, interior designer, real estate, like go for it, right? So like that's kind of the direction I'll go. Like you deserve to get as much money as possible. Like don't let me get in the way of that. And they're like, but I don't have the time, my energy. Like, oh, well then, we're generally not plan A. I mean, maybe even plan B. Like we're kind of insurance policy. Like, we're the people that homeowners call when they need their house sold now, right? But I don't mention the price. I just say like that's the consequence, right? So that's one scenario. But if it was a situation like, hey, look, I appreciate you coming over. I appreciate you talking about this, but I got a realtor. That's, I got a brother-in-law as a realtor. Then I wouldn't necessarily go with like, you should get the most price. I would just say, oh, you got a brother-in-law that will do this for free. That's fantastic. Like go do that. And now I'm just trying to create space where like, no, he won't do free. He's like, really? He's family? Interesting. So like, I don't have this, the positive and the negative. I'm kind of rolling with the energy I'm getting at the moment.
Right. So you're basically just giving them the positive and letting them give you the negative, assuming that rather than
but if we're further along in the negotiation, right? Because I've given the positive and we go, no, they're like, no, I don't want to do that, but I need more money. Then it's just like, well, I'm sorry, like, at that price we can't do that. We can't be a cash buyer at that price. And then seeing how that goes, then we start talking about alternative ways to buy their house or get their house sold. But yeah, like I don't have the either or, which I like what you're doing, because now they get to choose, but it feels it's a choice. That's not really a choice.
We've talked about, like, I think you brought up this analogy of because I love or questions. Like, you can do this or you can do this, which is in favor of this. One of the most important principles in all of persuasion and getting anyone to do anything, which is that people want a feeling of autonomy. They want to feel like they made their own choice, which is why people don't like being sold. They don't like going to the car lot and all the tactics that are done there, because car guys suck. And so as a result, like, they don't like that feeling. And so
they suck at sales. They're not bad people. They just suck at sales.
What Steve said. And as a result, they suck at sales. To me, that I put too much value in sales ability.
All right, you suck at sales. You're just a bad person.
He's just a bad person, inherently, obviously. No, of course not. So it's just it's like saying that for any role. Like, they'll hire. It's the joke I always tell about insurance is that if you can breathe onto a mirror and it fogs up, they'll hire you to sell insurance. Car sales is kind of the same thing.
Same thing with the realtor.
Right, yeah. So the differentiation here is, like, I'm trying to give two choices. So they keep that feeling of autonomy. The way I present the choices is putting my thumb on the scale, or sometimes even a magnet under the scale when we're looking at the number, and then it makes it so unlikely that they will pick that other thing. Because I'm also trying to, there's a hidden context here, which is, let's just say it's a price thing. Let's say, hey, I want, to be specific for the audience, let's say they say, I want $500,000 for my home. And because that's the Zillow market list, and would make sense, and theoretically, if they were to go with a realtor. Instead of just saying, I can't pay that price for cash, but I could recommend a realtor or something like that, or anything negative up front, or even what you're doing, which is that, oh yeah, if you want that, go with the realtor. My way of differentiating would probably be going, yeah, you can absolutely probably get close to $500,000 if you went with a realtor and, made any changes they suggested and went through the 6 months of waiting on market and did that whole song and dance. By the time people come to us, it's usually because they wanted to skip that process and that headache, and they're aware there's an adjustment on price because of it. And letting them feel like they're picking between. Sometimes I will include a question or a statement after that if I feel like they wouldn't open up. So I might be like, I don't know if one of those sounds better to you or not. Or if you had to pick between that, did one of them sound a little bit more ideal? Because I don't want to assume. I'm always trying to be like, hey, you can get eaten by a shark, eaten alive by a shark, or you can get $1 million. That's how I'm always trying to present the options in their subconscious, but ultimately they're making a choice. I'm not actually forcing them with yes, no questions or no, you need to do this. It's their decision, even though I said that path is thorns and bears and wolves and, like, I guess you can do that, but it does fall off a cliff. Or here's a path to the Four Seasons where they'll put a scented towel on your face. The choice is yours.
Yeah. Well, and the key here is that the choice you want them to go with is the second choice.
Right.
Because there's a way, naturally, humans, we like the last choice the most.
Exactly. But anyone with a toddler will be familiar with this, that if you're trying to make, do you want pasta or chicken for dinner? The statistical likelihood that they will say the second thing you say is pretty obvious with little kids. It's still obvious with adults too, often.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of stuff we do in sales, right, with the takeaway, the pull away, it's the same nonsense we did on the playground.
Right.
Right. $5 says you can't climb that wall.
Right.
Right. It's the same exact thing. We just sound a lot better.
We sound a lot more sophisticated now. But it's the same principle, because it's principles that you wanted that kid to climb the wall, you had to get him to climb the wall, like, and that same emotional tug that gets someone to want to take action, even though there might have to do a little more song and dance to get someone to do it. The same pull on the heart is happening.
Yeah, it's like I know. I mean, I just go back to, like, this is drinking, hanging out with friends. Is like, hey, like, I know I know you're a really good climber. I know you do all these things, but I don't really think you can climb that wall.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's possible. It's like, you can't. It's like, I don't know. I mean, $5 says you can't. And then it's just, again, a more polished version of, I bet you can't.
Right. It's true. What's also happening in how I'm in my giving those two choices, though, is by the very nature of them saying, I don't want the 6 months and the fix up and the wait and go through that song and dance. What's happening covertly, not overtly, because they're saying, I want that I want your process, is underneath that, it implies a different price.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not even saying, I want less. They're saying, no, I want that process. But because I just tethered the price that was $500,000 to a process that said they didn't want and said ours is an adjustment on price, there's a micro commitment to less.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not an overt commitment. It's happening in the back. And again, requires multiple things for someone to get reoriented around less price if they were logically fixed to a higher amount.
And in the way I've been doing this, it's been more along the lines like, so Ian, it sounds like you're trying to get as much money as possible. But at the same time, you want the convenience, the guarantee of a cash offer as fast as possible. How am I supposed to do that? Where then again, they come to the conclusion like, oh yeah, I can't get those things at the price I want. So I have to give up price, or I have to go this other direction. But there's no like leaning. It's just like, which one do you want?
Right.
It's just, how am I supposed to do that? And for me, it's not about directing. It's more highlighting what they're asking for is unreasonable.
Right.
You need to be more, what's the word I'm looking for? Pliable in their desires.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's like, even though yours is technically more open-ended, they get to verbalize it.
Yeah. Way more open-ended.
Way more open-ended. It also does imply that it's unreasonable in the nature of being open-ended. I'm trying to actually not even say what you're saying is unreasonable. It's just a process you don't want to go through.
All right.
So like I'm trying to avoid them even realizing it's unreasonable to give them that negative emotion, but by the very nature of continuing the conversation. So sometimes I'll make a statement like that and then pull away. I don't know if that sounds relevant for you, or if we should even continue this conversation right now.
Yeah.
Then. And by the very nature of choosing to continue the conversation, it's starting to say that the price is different without them going, oh, I'm not being unreasonable. Just, in fact, so I'm keeping them in where, hey, that's reasonable and this is reasonable. The choice is yours.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want that. Okay, I guess it means this. I'm trying to get, it's just a different.
And I think
flow.
the thing is like, there's nothing we're saying that it's your way or my way.
Right.
We could start with your way and later on go with my way.
Right.
Right. Like there's no like,
yes,
it's
exactly.
one or the other.
No.
Because one of the things, so we did a role play yesterday for a different client. And one of the things they noticed, because we were doing a role play where like, you're probably not going to buy it, right? Like there's not, the circumstances would not make sense for them to sell to a cash buyer. But in the role play, I mean, I was going at it for like, I think 10 to 12 minutes, going all these different angles. And his comment to me was like, you're just willing to stay in the box longer, right? Like you're not just gonna end the appointment. I was like, no, like I'm going to keep going until they tell me like to stop.
Right.
So I will end the sale. I'll talk about how great their options are, why they don't need us. And then I'm just going to keep saying all these different things to the point where either I'm going to find something eventually to tug on.
Yeah.
And once I got to grab them something, now I'm going to keep tugging. Or they're going to say, look, Steve, like, it's over. Just get out of my house. One of those two things is going to happen.
Yeah. This gets brought up a lot when I role play as well, that I say like, you're still asking questions about this. You just didn't give up. You stayed in the pocket and then found another string to pull on.
Yeah.
And I give the example of, I think it was maybe not the first, but one of your installment purchases where the homeowner was considering a different option.
Yeah.
That was higher. And in the process of disqualifying, I try to make this point. Your thought process is not, boy, I hope I get this sale now. You're saying, this is how, if I have to leave the home, I run through these steps. In the process of kind of trying to end the appointment, you still committed to the process rather than just going, oh, I guess I can't do it. No, I'll verbalize and run the process and give the prospect a chance to let me know if there's an alternative, and said, I guess there's just no way we could ever work together if we're going to be lower than that other offer.
Yeah.
And she corrected you and told you a way you could. Instead of other people go, oh, I guess there's no way I can do it. And they just leave.
Yeah.
And they don't give the homeowner the chance to be the hero of their own story and come up with the solution themselves.
Yeah, I think on that one offer was at 210, the other was at 215. And I was talking to her, I was like, knowing that I couldn't pay more than 200, like, as we were talking about this, like, I don't see any way we can work. There's like, I can't think of any reason why you would take less for your home. It's like, oh, there's a reason. It's like, oh, great. What is that reason? So yeah, like we were able to lock it up because I told her there was no reason and she found it for us.
Part of what you're comfort, because you were not immediately comfortable enough when you were having sales conversations with these homeowners to do something like that.
Initially, no.
No, initially, no, right? It's just like, because this gets brought up a lot with a lot of the questions that I ask, which is like, how did you get comfortable being able to ask that question? Because so many people in sales or people having sales conversations are afraid to say that because like that would lose the sale. And I'm a big believer in giving the prospect their own objections so that they can overcome. Like, if I have a concern, if I think early on that this person's not going to have enough money to pay for my thing, so many salespeople go like, I'll cross my fingers and hope.
I hope they'll find it.
I hope they have enough money. And almost as soon as I realize this is an issue, I'm bringing it up as an issue. And like, as soon as you were thinking, I don't know how I can do that, you told them, I don't see any way you could do that. And then they corrected you and told you how. Yeah. What are your thoughts on how so many salespeople are afraid to actually say the thing that not saying is costing them the sale because then the prospect doesn't get to be the hero of their own story?
I think there's a few different things. I think the first one is, experience, right? Like at first, it's like, if I do this and I lose a sale, it's going to be a problem, right? So I think the first thing is experience, especially if there are quotas to meet.
Yeah.
Now you got to go back. It's like, I didn't get the contract. Well, why didn't you get the contract? So like, first one is the quota thing. The second thing is something you can do about, hopefully you can do something about, which is having a great pipeline. Nothing solves, so we say sales solves all problems, right? One of the best ways to solve any kind of sales problems is having a great pipeline. You got a great pipeline, you don't need this sale. The power of not needing this sale is so attractive, right, for our prospects. Like the fact that you don't need this sale is like, God, like what's he doing? How do I work with him, right? So I think the power that A, knowing that this helps, but B, when you got a great pipeline, you can be completely emotionally detached. And now you can say whatever when you're not emotionally attached to the outcome. Today's podcast is brought to you by MotivatedLeads.com. With them, you can get $300 worth of quality local leads sent exclusively to your inbox by just mentioning my name. I've used them, and they're one of the best producers of solid seller leads on a local level. And they fully guarantee the leads that they send you. To get your $300 free credit, just head over to MotivatedLeads.com, hit the Claim Your Area button, and let them know that I sent you.
Yeah, I talk a lot on this podcast about not just conveying, but embodying non-neediness. Like, if you can actually embody non-neediness, so many more things fall into your lap.
Right.
If you can exist in that space kind of at all times, I think a lot about something I heard from Lance Armstrong, which now that he's like back in podcasting, even though he's slightly disgraced still in terms of the American public, but like back in it, is he had this line, which is that I went through life for forever and still kind of do, just assuming everyone's going to say yes to me. Now, that doesn't mean assuming you're going to get every single sale. I actually go in assuming it's just my job to get a yes or a no. But I also think if this person is closable, I will close. I think that every single time. And if not, I don't need this. I don't need to waste my time on this.
Right.
Even if I'm hurting financially in that moment, I embody that at all times, which actually gets me better results because you are inherently compelling and appealing if you assume things are going to work out and kind of convey that neediness. So you were talking about like actually make it happen. I'm just telling salespeople, just embody it as best you can, regardless of your pipeline. You'll actually get better results anyway.
Yeah. One of the things is act as if.
Yeah.
Act as if is so powerful. The other one people say is fake it till you make it. That's not so great.
It's not as ideal because
it
implies other things.
Same conceptually, but your brain does not process it the same.
No.
But like acting as if you're rich and you're a closer, that will convey in an appointment. Fake it till you make it, that doesn't really work as well.
No, fake, because by the very nature of, we're talking about like being specific with our language,
Yeah.
by the nature of faking it, you don't believe it.
Right.
The reason I think acting as if is powerful is because if you actually believe, people say yes, you believe you can close every deal. If you believe it, that colors the way you feel, like your thoughts about external circumstances. Like, oh, that guy didn't have the money. That guy was no good anyway. He never would have closed.
Yeah.
It's not me. And if you have a feeling about that you don't beat yourself up or whatever, then because of that, that will dictate also how you act. And how you act, and especially how you act repeatedly, is what actually dictates your results. So belief of acting as if can actually dictate your results. The very nature of choosing to say fake it means you don't actually believe it.
Yeah. So and that's just fresh in my mind because I was just on a chat right now with somebody else, and he like, he made the comment, fake it to me. He's like, act as if.
Yeah.
Act as if.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to get into an interesting idea, which is that in trying to examine someone's hesitations to move forward, instead of maybe asking a direct question like that is quite open-ended and confrontational, like what's stopping you from moving forward, is instead try and place them as the type of person who wants that problem solved, but call out a hesitation. So instead of saying what's stopping you from moving forward, which is curiosity for them to then verbalize what's stopping them, I would rather say like, you seem really committed to solving this. I'm aware there's probably some setbacks. I guess I should even ask because I'm sensing some hesitation. What's the real reason you're even wanting to have this conversation now?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get, and we're talking about, we only ask questions about pain we can solve. I also only want my prospect verbalizing things that are towards the sale, or I actually know I can't waste my time. So I wouldn't, assuming that I think I'm not wasting my time, I don't even want to ask a question that what they tell me could cost me is moving away from the sale.
Yeah.
Unless disqualification is different. But if I think they're qualified, everything I'm asking them is to get them to verbalize something where it makes sense for us to work together, not even to tell me the reasons they don't want to. Because I think in pursuit of them verbalizing that, they will convince themselves against the reasons they don't want to because they said it instead of me asking that question, then I know all their reasons and then I have to attack those reasons.
Yeah. So I think this one, what you're talking about here, I think you're a lot better in this arena than I am because the way I would attack it is a little bit different.
Okay.
Right? Because the way I would attack it generally is like I didn't do a good enough job creating this awesome movie of them in it about how awesome life's going to be after we work together.
Sure.
Right? And if we do that strong enough, like they should be compelling themselves. And other things I might say is like, I don't think now's the right time. I think we jumped the gun. Like it seems like you're in no hurry.
Right.
And I'll kind of label it that, and I want them to correct me. Right. So like something I'll say is like, Ian, it sounds like if this takes 6 months to figure out, it's no big deal. And again, that goes back to like, emotionally detached and just kind of labeling the situation in the hopes that they'll correct me. It's like, no, Steve, it is a big deal. I was like, oh, sorry, I misunderstood. Why is it a big deal?
Right.
And then for them to elaborate. So like that's the direction I would go with it.
It's still in pursuit of the same thing though, which is them verbalizing the reason they're moving forward.
Yeah.
But the way you're doing it is, how would you describe that as being like, I guess mine is I'm trying to stay more positive with them and you're calling out the negative it's much like we talked about before, which is that you're stopping a little bit harsher and more extreme and letting them correct you otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I think I really embrace, we talk about Sandler and the pendulum and like always staying a little bit enthusiastic, one bit less enthusiastic than them or one step less enthusiastic than them. So like that's my default. Yeah. And I do that a lot because it works. Like it works for me. So I'm going to keep doing it. Whereas yours is more exploratory and, it's you're asking a question where it's open-ended. It's kind of open-ended where they'll tell you the reasons why. Yeah. So I'm more assumptive and negative. And I think you're more curious and nowhere near as negative.
I'd say probably nowhere near as negative, but I think energy-wise, if we're thinking about that principle of Sandler staying a step behind them, I'm still trying to be like, I'm still sensing some hesitation.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not even sure why you even want to do this now. So even though I'm not as negative, I'm still behind them in certainty,
Right.
so that they verbalize it. It's just a different way to be behind them.
Yeah.
One's negatively a step behind them, and one's sort of curiosity a step behind them.
Yeah.
So I love just remaining curious at all times, and then whenever I sense a discrepancy, I just blame my own understanding of it. I'm like, I'm not understanding this at all. I'm totally missing something.
Yeah.
And then they are illuminating things for me, and they get to be the smart one in trying to explain what's really going on.
Yeah, because I think the instance where you're saying like I'm sensing some hesitation. For me, I would use that when I hear a counterfeit yes. Right. In those instances, like, hey, Ian, I appreciate you saying, you're on board with what we're talking about here, but I'm sensing some hesitation. Am I crazy here?
Yeah.
So like in those instances, that's where like that word track would come out for me.
Okay.
Right. A counterfeit yes, we're going to call it out by calling the hesitation. But if I feel like, and maybe just in this example, I'm picturing a person that's like, yeah, I'm not ready to do anything right now. I'm just like, well, then forget all of it, right?
Oh, no. So to be clear, I'm saying that if someone's like, I think this sounds great.
Oh, okay. So then I was looking at a prospect. A prospect that's like, this looks great. I'm ready to go. I was like, I might ask something along the lines like, I'm curious, like, why now? Like, what's going on? It's like, if someone's like, I'm ready to go right now, I was like, I'm curious what's going on. Like, why are you interested right now? Just so they can tell me why now is important.
Yeah. So you're okay. Yeah.
So I think maybe just in my head, the example you were giving, I was thinking of a person that's like, nope, I don't need to do anything. Then I would go like super hard, like, oh, okay, sounds like 6 months. Is that gonna be a problem?
Right. Yeah. It's very interesting the difference, because I think for many of the listeners, it will seem very, very similar, because we're talking about very specific nuances. Because it's still the same general type of flow, but for some people who do it all the time, we're more noticing the differences.
Yeah, because I'm sensing where your energy is, and I want to just be one step less. So in the example you're saying, in my head, they were
why
like,
now?
They were neutral,
right?
But if they're like giddy and ready to go, I was like, well, hang on, before we do this, like, I don't understand, like, what's going on? Like, why did you even reach out to us? Why does it have to be right now?
Well, to be clear, what I just said, even though they were saying something that was affirmative, the language they were using implied logical thinking, so I'm assuming it's neutral. So if they're like, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking this sounds pretty good, I'm like, I'm still sensing some hesitation. Am I totally off base there?
Yeah.
Because they're using language that shows they're not feeling. And so it like becomes this other hack that, because I'm sort of seeing that they're not ready to make a decision, what they're likely to tell me is, this sounds great. Let me run the numbers, and let me talk to my partner real quick and see if we can do this. That's what I'm expecting.
Yeah, and I think part of this too, right, is for some of the people that are not as familiar with it, I think Neil Rackham talks about happy years.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like I've been guilty of this. It's like, oh, they're ready to go. Let's go ahead and sign this up. And then we move so fast, and they're like, well, hang on, let me just check a few more things. Because we were so agreeable, because they were such a hot lead.
Yeah.
And then the happy years, you were saying, like, they're saying, I think for you is flashing yellow.
Yeah. It's
proceed with caution. But for most people, yeah, I think this sounds pretty good. I think we're good with it. Most people take that as like they're right there.
Right. No,
You're taking that as flashing yellow.
Exactly. In fact, I think yellow is even worse than red. So to me, yellow is the worst possible color, because the caution, because at least red I understand. Like no is fine.
Yeah.
I like this and I need you to follow up with me because I like it is hell for me.
Purgatory.
It's
no man's land.
I hate it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to overcome that, but they have no idea. Like they'll be like, "What do you mean?" Like I'm always but I'm behind them because I'm trying to create the feeling of certainty in how they verbalize what they want to do. That's my thought process there. Is that I'm hearing and the last time I had happy years, I thought I'd gotten rid of my happy years, and then it was a couple months. I think it was November. I had happy years again with a client who, qualified everything. Like they told me like, oh, I absolutely want to. Like this is such a thing, and I was like, all right, I'll believe you. And of course they did not. Like so, I think the only thing I know of that can actually overcome salesperson happy years is just doing it enough that you are so confronted with the statistical reality
Yeah.
of what that really means that you like, even though because you still want to have the inclination, just the reality you've been through enough overrules what your ears will want you to hear.
The joke I make all the time in our training is that if I sound jaded and broken, it's because I'm jaded and broken.
Yeah. It's jaded and broken is how you're. I'm just aware of reality, which is I guess that's probably how the people.
What was it? I was talking to someone yesterday. I was like a conversation where someone was disappointed and said, "Well, I know what your problem is." It's like, "What's your problem? What's my problem?" It's like, "You still have faith in humanity."
Yeah.
Right. Whereas I've lost all faith in humanity, and so I'm pleasantly surprised all the time. But like when bad things happen, it's like, well, okay, and I'm generally an optimistic person. I just don't hope things will go right. I set myself up so things will go right.
Right. Yeah, we were talking about acting as if and having the belief that people say yes to you, but it's also, I believe that before I'm actually in a real circle. I can just believe that as a general vibe at all times. But I think when it comes to the specificity, I'm just assuming people are lying.
Well,
it's just a thing. Yeah, distinction.
I expect that I will perform.
Right.
And I expect you will lie to me in a sales conversation.
Right.
Like those are the expectations.
Okay, yeah, got it.
Right. So I expect you to lie to me, but I expect a good outcome because I expect myself to perform.
Right.
When it's time to perform.
Yeah. So it's what we talked about. It's a self-belief for your ability to overcome the realities of the world kind of thing. Yeah. I think I share that pretty much 100% with you. One of the last things I wanted to talk about was this idea of, it doesn't come up quite as much in how you go for the close in buying houses, but very much the sort of like being assumptive around next steps, especially around the close. So this got brought up yesterday when I was on someone else's podcast who was a coach. I coached him on how to sell his coaching services at the end, which was super fun to do. And he was having trouble. His closing line, I told him, was literally, he ran a pretty good process he didn't set expectations in any way, shape, or form. So I gave him that. And then he's gotten better at asking questions and then not actually coaching in the moment because he had made that mistake before. But his closing question was, I told him, I was like, I think this is literally the worst closing question the worst thing I've ever heard at the end, which is, so let me know what you think. It literally had a, what do you think? And a let me know later what you think to close in it. And so I gave him a new closing question and I was helping him with that. But when we got to so do I send them a link? I said, no, have them sign up right there. Well, how do I do that where they are comfortable or like I feel good internally being on the call, because otherwise I feel like, well, give me your money, and then we're off the call. Yeah. And the advice I gave to him is to genuinely have a reason after it, which is what you were in pursuit of, which is to schedule the first session. But you can't actually schedule the session until they paid. Yeah. So I'll send you the link. You can click, because rather than taking the info over the phone, he sends a link so they can click it. And then once that's clicked, let me know, and I'll open up the calendar, look at the session. So it becomes this like assumptive thing, which you can also then say all the time, hey, the whole goal is to schedule that first session. So you can be assumptive around the thing that you're going to do on that call, but to even do that, you have to get paid first. What are your thoughts just around that idea?
So one of the things I learned a long time ago is if this is just part of the process, people go along with it. Yeah. If you make a big deal, it's a big freaking deal. Right. And so I learned this as a realtor. I was like, all right, Ian, you want these 10 things, like we did an inspection, you want these 10 things repaired. I'm going to go to bat for you. And I'm going to get these 10 things done. And then the listing agent's like, go to hell. Right. He comes back, he's like, man, Ian, like, I know you want those 10 things. They told us 0. Like, I can't believe this. I can't believe this realtor is blah, 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 blah. Right. And now you're angry about it. And now like this whole transaction's gone to hell. Right. Right. But I say, man, Ian, like, look, we're going to ask for these 10. Realistically, they might agree to 1 or 2. Realistically. And so this is what we're going to do. And if they come back and say they'll do all 10, great. If they say they'll do 1 or 2, like, that's just the way it is. Right. Come back, realtor, and I'll talk to the realtor about like, hey, like, where are we, this and that. And then whatever they give me, hey, look, they're really upset, but I was able to get them to agree to 5. That's just part of the process. You feel good about it. I didn't make a big deal about it.
Right.
I said, hey, here's the process. It's this element of like, asking for a credit card. I gotta get it. And then you get your own self-beliefs, right? And I gotta get them to agree to credit card. Oh man, it's gonna be this whole big deal. I was like, hey, Ian, here are the next steps. So for us to get scheduled, all we need is your credit card. And once we have your credit card, we can go ahead and get you scheduled for the onboarding call. And now we can get started, call and, whenever we schedule the onboarding. Like, oh, okay. When I say here are the next steps, this is what's normal. He's like, okay, well, this is normal. I feel safe.
Right.
But if I like hem and haw and like, okay, so Ian, here's what we're gonna need.
Yeah.
I need your credit card. Why is it so weird? And just this energy you bring, this vibe you bring to this conversation is what causes the resistance.
It's so true. I mean, this came up. This was very true for me in part of the selling solar process, because we had to do a third-party call after we signed the contract. And this was like a VA in some other country, so they had an accent. People are already nervous about solar being a scam. Like, that's a normal thing anyway. And then I was so freaked out. I always made it a big deal. Like, all right, we have to do this because we have to go through this and answer yes to everything. If you have any questions, I'll talk about it afterwards. Like, it was like I made it a big deal. And I lost multiple sales where they had already signed the contract from that call. I mean, I lost thousands and thousands of dollars in personal commission on someone else's thing, not even my thing, just because I made this call a big deal. And when I made the shift of, I don't make this a big deal. In fact, I would laugh. I was like, they're going to ask you 10 questions. I don't know. Give you an answer to everything's yes. They don't have any answers for you. There's someone in some other country that has to do this. They have no idea what they're asking. They have to run through this. If you have any questions, we'll clarify it afterwards. It's like a nothing thing. Sometimes they even ask a thing you don't even understand what they're saying. It's crazy. When I made it no big deal, it was never a problem for me again.
Right.
And so that's why I talk about the self-belief a lot. What you believe is a big deal, your prospects will treat as a big deal. So if you have a resistance to taking the credit card, I think the first thing to do is probably just think, I have to act like it's not a big deal. Even you don't have to, because it's way easier to be like, I'm going to put on a performance like this isn't a big deal, rather than to overcome your own self-limitations for the first call. Oh, we got an interesting background shot there. Rather than overcome my limitations for the first call. We're back. So what happens is, once you get it that one time, then you realize that you got rewarded, it's then never a big deal again. So just act as if the first time, a little bit of fake it till you make it on that one thing, only in that for this one little strategic, like, if you can pretend it's not a big deal, by even getting through that one time, you'll then realize
it's not a big deal.
It's not a big deal.
I mean, just think about like Tony Robbins' big thing, right, is the firewalk. Whatever that thing is, you're walking on coals, right? If you can imagine, like, all right, everybody, so look, I need you to sign this disclaimer because we're going to be walking on coals, and there's a possibility it probably won't, but it might.
Yeah.
Right? Versus, all right, everyone, we're walking on coals now. Right? It's just, oh, okay, this is what we're doing.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing what you can, the influence you have just by what you act like is a big deal or not. Yeah. Cool. All right. The last one I wanted to touch on before we wrap up here is this idea of sort of like pinpointing a real objection after you've maybe the last 10% at the end of the conversation, if you're trying to get someone to close and they just still can't get there, or maybe they feel like they're using thinking language or whatever. I mean, it's a newer development that I'm aware I'm about to get, this is good, but let me think about it. I think the biggest mistake that most people make is their closing question is yes oriented. Rather than open-ended. I was just thinking about this today, which is that my favorite closing question is, if we can take care of X, we can take care of Y, we can take care of Z, 3 pain points that they had verbalized as important to them that we solve. How should we prioritize this? And after they say it's a big priority, what do you feel we should do now? I think that's my favorite, though I'm aware that if someone is not yet good at sales, they might ask that question. They take too long to ask that question. That confuses the prospect because there's variables in it.
Yeah.
They don't say it concisely. And so by making it open-ended, the person go, yeah, no, I guess I'll talk to my brother and figure it out by being open-ended. And so sometimes I say it's okay to go, if we can take care of X, we can take care of Y, and take care of Z. Do you feel like this is a priority? So intentionally close off and then say, what do you feel like we should do now? Or something along those lines where you get open-ended to actually close, but you get a yes first, because if you're not good enough, the double open-ended can throw you off.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
Hey, Disruptors. I just want to share that myself, as well as about half of the people on the show for Disruptors, are members of the Collective Genius Real Estate Mastermind, also known as CG. Now, I've been a member of the Collective Genius for well over 4 years now, along with about 700 other top-tier real estate investors that flip a combined over 50,000 homes per year. And I've personally made a ton of money and developed some deep, personal, lifelong friendships there. If you want to look behind the scenes of what it's like to be an esteemed member of this organization and how it's helped me scale, please check out cgmastermind.com.
I mean, I think it's good. For me, 'cause I think having them pick, it's kind of like going back to, when I was a realtor, I was like, which house would you like to make an offer on first? And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, of the 8 we saw here, or the 3 we saw today, I was like, I'll say this one, right? What I've always liked to do was reminding them of the rules we established beforehand. Hey, it makes sense for us to work together. It means we'll put everything in writing, right? So I remind them right beforehand. Like, remember we talked about this earlier?
Yeah.
And then we go through like the inoffensive close, and then it's like, well, what would you like me to do now? And they're like, well, you told me if I felt comfortable, this is what we do. It's like, well, okay, only if you're comfortable.
Right.
But like, I planted that seed when we started the appointment. I reminded them of that seed about a minute before I asked them, what would you like me to do now? What you're doing here is you're saying, here are the 3 things that you said were important. Which would you like to prioritize? Or for someone newer, like,
I don't say
you feel like it's a priority.
Yeah. I don't say which would you like to prioritize. I say if we're going to take care of all of it. All I'm doing is stacking the things we solve. So we're doing all 3.
Right.
How would you like to prioritize?
Or how would you like to prioritize?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in that mode, you've gotten them to mentally spent, right? Like they're not mentally spent, but they're mentally doing it.
Yeah.
Right. Like we talk about quite a bit about future pacing, it's like now they're using your product.
Right.
Right. And now they're using their product. Them not buying your product now is going to cause cognitive dissonance.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
Right. And so like, oh no, I want this. Why are we taking this away?
Right.
So I think it's powerful.
That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah. I will often, that your point about telling them what other people have done, I also like, I'm trying to be conscious about giving a little bit too much away, since many people on this who watch this podcast will end up being prospects. But like, there's an aspect of like, I mean, typically at this point when people thought it was valuable, they wanted to get started so they could at least go through the first thing and set up that next call so they could be on this at this time. I guess for you, if we can make sure that you can X, you can Y, you can Z, it's always how should we prioritize this? I like first person plural language. In that we're doing this together, and then what do you feel like you should do now? So it's like, how should we prioritize it? Well, and then they don't say we. They say, no, I know it's a huge priority. And I go, okay, what do you feel like you should do now? I feel like I should probably sign up. Yeah.
Because they've already experienced using the product.
Right. And to say, well, let me hold off for a bit now, they now lose the 3 pains that they could just envision solving. And they lose that feeling and have that hurts who they feel like they are because they just had a moment of their pain going away.
Yeah. It's like they were out in the cold.
Yeah.
And they walked into the cabin with the log cabin with the fire going. It's nice and warm. They've got their hot cocoa. They got their blanket. It's feeling pretty good. They're experiencing it.
Right.
And then you're asked, what would you like to do now? And like, well, I need to think about it. They're, in a way, walking right out. They're taking the blanket off, putting the hot cocoa down, and walking right out into the snowstorm again.
Right. Exactly.
They're choosing to walk into the snowstorm versus staying in the cabin.
Compared to the single most common closing question I hear in wholesaling real estate, which is that if we can do this price, would you even feel comfortable signing today? And they're like, yes. And they go, okay, I'm going to send this over. And then they go, well, hang on a second. I got to run it by my sister, or let me think about this, or I'm feeling rushed. Or
My attorney. Yeah.
I talk to my attorney first.
Yeah.
I need some time with this. That is the single most common closing question I see, even from like sophisticated teams.
Yeah.
They still close that way.
Right.
Get a counterfeit yes. And when it comes to the specifics of, you have to actually, the counterfeit, the yes is not what gets the sale. It's actually the signing the contract or taking the credit card. It's clicking the link. It's doing something because they were in pursuit of a yes rather than in pursuit of, what do you feel like we should do now? How should we take care of this? How should we prioritize this? Would this be a thing that you even find helpful? I guess, what do you feel like we should do now? Like, instead of that, like, what would you want to have happen next? Them verbalizing it, they're getting counterfeit yeses. And then they're dealing with the delay objection afterwards once the salesperson thought the job was done. And there's this like mismatch in the salesperson being like, wait, what? I thought I was already thinking about the money I was like, what I was going to buy with this commission check. And it becomes this total
Another loss.
failure. And now it's a loss for the salesperson instead of for the
I'm not saying
prospect.
that now it's not just a loss for the salesperson, but also like their brain is jarred.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Like you
True.
got sacked by a blindside hit.
Yeah.
And now you're getting back up. Like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And
Where did I get hit from?
Right. And now you got to get your bearings back. And that moment of getting jarred, you're not your best self to overcome this objection.
It's also the worst time for it to happen because tensions are already highest right at the end going for the close anyway. It's like the worst. It's crazy because like this is done by so many companies and they make this mistake over and over. And in fact, I still tell companies not to, and then they still make that mistake. Like, I don't know what to do to get people to train their team on this. That's why I'm trying to say close off before the open-ended question, because you don't have to be as skilled. Because like I'm aware some of the stuff we talked about on this podcast, like the recapping back, the mana potion thing, is harder to train than it is to talk about conceptually. To actually train of like, here's this step and here's this and here's this. Because when someone is not super fast cognitively or not super experienced of having gone through this 1,000 times, it can feel overwhelming. And that sense of overwhelming is just too advanced for me. They don't even try it. They get overwhelmed. They just do it wrong and go, see, I did it and it didn't work, and they did it wrong. And so I just wish I could make this as easy as possible for other people to apply, because these concepts are advanced, but I also want to be able to train them at scale.
Yeah, I mean, I think the greatest problem is they might be aware of the principle. Are they applying it?
Yeah.
And then if they're applying it, are they applying it correctly? And it's hard to know because you're taking an abstract principle. Things we're talking about, you can't hold it in your hand. You can't see it, do this, right? We're speaking conceptually. You and I are applying it, and we're training it on all the time, and we're doing it in call reviews. But if you're listening to this and you're not doing call reviews, you're not role-playing it, it's kind of hard to correct it because your ability to process it, your awareness that you're not doing it correct is a difficult task. It's a big ask.
Yeah.
Right? Like the thing I talk about all the time, right? Basketball. So by the way, just shout out right here. I hit a couple of NBA threes this morning because we play using NBA threes. But like when I'm off on my shot, I don't know what's off of my shot. Right. Because it's me.
Yeah.
But a friend of mine is like, why aren't you bending your knees? Like, I don't know why I'm not bending my knees. Right? So you need someone else.
The outside party to actually notice what's not working.
Yeah. So you need someone else to observe who knows what to look for.
Right. Yeah. It comes to this principle of like, is sales training something we did or something we do? Right. And also, is it valuable to have a coach or an authority? I mean, it sounds self-serving for us to talk about this.
Yeah.
But so many people understand this concept in something physical, right? But it becomes very hard for, I think, the average person to apply this to the soft skill of persuasion, sales conversations, running a process. They are aware that on the surface, their golf swing, for someone who's not sophisticated, can just look like they're swinging a golf club. But it requires an expert who's actually watching in slow-mo and goes, see, this is half a degree off, and that's why you never hit the green. And it's like, you can understand that for a physical thing over and over again, but we lose this because it seems like once I've learned this knowledge, I should know it forever. And it's just not how sales conversations work. It should be treated like a physical sport. That's why I call, like, I didn't come up with this. Jeb Blunt initially made this point, but I will repeat it until the day I die, that sales professionals are the athletes of the business world, and they should treat their time, the way they review footage, the way they try and improve, not in the game, but during practice, the exact same way. And I just wish we could, like, I could broadcast this out to the world. That's why I'm doing this man on the street content and everything, is to try and broadcast this message so people adapt these changes.
You want to hear something embarrassing?
Always.
So there was a time I had a flip cam, right? And I was trying to get good at golf. So I recorded our golf swings. And I'm looking at my golf swing, right? Again, with the other guys I'm golfing with. And, like, in my opinion, I've got a great golf swing.
Yeah, of course.
I can't see anything wrong with it, right? Like, everything that they're telling me to do, I'm doing all of them. Now, it's not working, right? It's not doing the outcome is not in alignment with how it's supposed to go. But at my skill level, I can't see what I'm doing wrong.
Right.
By everything I know to be true, my golf swing is great.
Right.
But it's clearly not.
Right.
And I can't fix it.
I think that's not embarrassing. I mean, that's pretty normal, I think.
But in my mind, it was such a beautiful swing.
In your mind, it was beautiful. That is a little embarrassing. You're like, I've got a beautiful swing. Fair enough. But, like, this comes up time and again. I mean, it's why it's funny that I was joking that we're selling sales training to the wrong people, because by the very nature of being a salesperson, you think you're good at sales.
Right.
And so you're not problem aware because you think, I got a great golf swing. It was the weather that day. It was the leads. It's the marketing department. It's the economy. It's everything but me, because look at how beautiful my swing is.
Right.
It'd be like we're having that issue because as they are, by the nature of doing this professionally, inherently thinking they're already pretty good. Now, even the ones who are actually good, they tend to have this thought process of, I can always get better, but they're still operating from a place of, well, I'm good though.
Yeah.
And when you have that, you don't realize what's wrong in your swing. And there's like 50 different things that you're doing wrong that could give you this massive impulse. And also because in sales, the whole reason that someone like Andy Elliott is so popular is because it's so oriented around activity and motivation. Sometimes you can just do more work than everyone else, and then you still make more money than everyone else around you. And so you have this reinforcement of, like, oh, because I did more activity and I'm making more money, therefore what I'm doing is working. And then you already have the belief that my swing is good, and so you just have all these blind spots and you don't know where to improve, and you think you're amazing already.
I did have Jesse Burrell at one point come out with me to the driving range.
Okay.
And it's like, I'm feeling pretty good. Like, what do you think? Because he was at one point a trained PGA trainer. He's like, do this and do this. And significant improvements, right?
Yeah.
But again, on my level of knowledge, everything was good. A professional, having someone like you, someone like me, review the calls, like, hey, when they said this, what was going through your head? When you said this, what were you applying?
Yeah. Well, that's all I really got to go through that stuff today. I mean, I always like to say that some of the stuff I talk about on this podcast, on some of these episodes, is the assuming you're already doing enough work to justify trying to get better. So I always say there's like 3 levers anyone can pull at any given time and how to think about it, which is like how much work you're actually doing, your skill set at that work, and your kind of mindset and fuel to actually either do more work or try and get better. That's as an individual contributor, those are the main things to focus on. And so some people can get stuck in the improvement loop and think they're always just trying to get as good as possible. They're really just not even doing enough work to justify being in sales in the first place. Once you are actually putting in a right amount of dials or knocks or whatever you're doing, having enough appointments, actually working a consistent 40-hour week, if nothing else, and you want to get better, that's usually when you can apply an advanced principle like recapping with a mana potion kind of thing, because the lowest hanging fruit is just doing more work. It's why people like Andy Elliott make any money in the first place and call themselves sales trainers, is because if someone shouts at you to do more work and you do more work, you'll probably make more money. But once you're sophisticated enough to be past the point of someone shouting at you to do more work and you actually want to get better, that's when the professional look in your golf swing steps in. So anything else you want to give the audience before I wrap up?
I mean, this has been fun. I know, like, something you and I talk about, coming on, just having more of these conversations. So look forward to future ones. This is good. Hopefully everyone who's watching got a ton of value out of it.
I hope so. Let us know if there was anything that you had heard that sounded new to you, sounded novel, or how you will apply it going forward. Let us know in the comments. Let us know in the review. It helps the algorithm, and we're trying to expand this out. It helps us know that people are listening and getting value. So I'm Ian Ross. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for coming on. This has been the Close More Sales Podcast.
Shout out to Steve Trang. Jump on the Steve Trang. Disruptors.